Adaora was the picture of success. As a CEO of a thriving interior design company in Lagos, she had built her business from the ground up. At home, she had a loving husband, Chuka, and 2 wonderful children. To outsiders, Adaora's life seemed perfect, but Adaora had a secret, one that was about to catch up with her and destroy everything she had worked for. Years ago, when Adaora was in university, she struggled to pay her tuition. Desperate and running out of options, she accepted financial help from a wealthy classmate, Ikenna. But Ikenna's generosity came with strings attached. He made her sign a written agreement, promising to marry him after graduation. It was a desperate decision, one she never intended to follow through on. When Adaora graduated, she vanished from Ikenna's life without a word. She met Chuka, fell in love and started a new life. She thought she had left that part of her past behind. But as she stood at her business awards ceremony, smiling for cameras, accepting applause, her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen flashed unknown caller. Her heart sank. She had been receiving these calls for the past week. Adaora declined the call, her hand trembling slightly as she thanked the guests for their support. That night when she returned home, Chuka greeted her warmly. He was so proud of her and their children ran into her arms, making her forget the unease gnawing at her. But peace was fleeting. The next day, as Adaora sat in her office, the door opened and Ikenna walked in. His presence was like a ghost from the past, bringing with it a flood of memories. Adaora had tried to forget. She froze, her heart pounding. Ikenna looked at her with a cold smile. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" he said, his voice as smooth and dangerous as it had been all those years ago. Adaora could hardly breathe. She stammered, "Ikenna, it's been years. I'm married now. You can't be serious." "Oh, I am serious," Ikenna replied, his eyes darkening. "I want what you promised me, Ada. You owe me." The weight of his words pressed down on her. He wasn't bluffing. Ikenna had come to collect his promise. Adaora stood up from her desk, trying to gather her composure, but her mind raced with fear. "Ikenna, what are you doing here?" Ikenna stepped closer, a predatory smile creeping onto his face. "I think you know. I came to collect what's mine. You owe me, Adaora, and I'm here to collect." "I don't owe you anything," she said, her voice flattering. "That was a long time ago. I'm married now. I have a family." Ikenna's smile disappeared. "Do you think I care about that? You made a promise, Ada. You signed a contract, and now it's time to make good on it." Adaora's hand clenched into fist. "That was years ago. I was desperate. You can't hold me to something I didn't even mean." But Ikenna wasn't listening. His eyes darkened as he leaned closer. "Oh, but I can. You walked away from me without a word, Ada. You disappeared and left me with nothing. Now I will destroy everything you love if you don't leave that husband of yours and come with me." Adaora's breath caught in her throat. Her body trembled. "You can't do this." Ikenna's smirk returned. "Watch me." For days, Adaora lived in terror. Ikenna began following her everywhere, to her children's school, to her meetings, even to her home. He sent her photos of herself with her family, taken from a distance, with chilling messages attached. "TikTok, Adaora, time is running out." Each day, Adaora became more paranoid, unable to concentrate at work. Her once impeccable demeanor was now overshadowed by anxiety and fear. At home, Chuka began to notice the change. He confronted her one evening as they lay in the bed. "You've been acting strange, Ada," Chuka said, frowning. "You're always on edge. What's going on?" Adaora shook her head, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just work. I'm under a lot of pressure with the new contract." Chuka studied her face, unconvinced. "Are you sure? Because you've been distant. You're not telling me something." Adaora's heart raced, but she couldn't tell him. How could she? If Chuka knew the truth, he would never forgive her. "I am fine, Chuka," she said softly. "Just walk." The following week, Ikenna escalated his threats. He sent Adaora a letter containing the old contract she had signed years ago. The terms were clear. Upon receiving financial assistance, Adaora agrees to marry Ikenna after graduation. It was a legally binding document, and Ikenna knew how to use it against her. One afternoon, Adaora met with her best friend Nkechi at a cafe. She couldn't keep it to herself any longer. She poured out the entire story, from the deal with Ikenna to the threats he was making. Nkechi listened in shock, gripping her hand as Adaora cried in frustration and fear. "You need to tell Chuka the truth," Nkechi urged. "You can't keep this from him. Ada, if Ikenna goes public with this, it will even be worse." Adaora shook her head. "I can't. Chuka will leave me. He won't understand." Nkechi squeezed her hand tighter. "You don't have a choice. Ada, Ikenna isn't going to stop." But Adaora wasn't ready to face the truth. She still believed she could handle Ikenna on her own. Desperation finally drove Adaora to confront Ikenna. She agreed to meet him late at night in a secluded area, hoping she could negotiate with him one last time. The air was thick with tension as they stood in the dimly lit parking lot. "You should have just left your husband and done what I asked," Ikenna said, his voice laced with bitterness. "Ikenna, please," Adaora pleaded, her voice trembling. "I will pay you whatever you want. I will give you the money you spent. Anything. Just leave my family out of this." Ikenna's face twisted with rage. "It was never about the money. You humiliated me, Ada. You left me without a word and went on to live your perfect little life. I want you, not your money." The anger between them escalated. In the heat of the argument, Ikenna grabbed her arm roughly. Adaora tried to pull away, but in the struggle, Ikenna lost his balance and fell. His head hit a nearby rock with a sickening crack. "No!" Ikenna lay unconscious, blood pooling beneath him. In a state of shock and panic, Adaora fled the scene, her heart pounding, tears streaming down her face. Days passed, and Adaora lived in constant fear. Each time the phone rang, her heart would leap into her throat. She checked the news obviously, but there was no report about Ikenna's accident. Had she killed him? The guilt gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Chuka. Then one evening, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Ikenna. It was his brother, Obinna. "Ikenna is in coma," Obinna said, his voice cold and detached. "He told me everything about you, about the contract. You thought you could just walk away from this? My brother might not wake up, but I will make sure you pay for what you did." Adaora's world collapsed around her. The walls seemed to close in, and she couldn't breathe. She had no choice now but to confess everything to Chuka. The weight of her guilt and fear was too much to bear. That evening, as the children slept, Adaora sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chuka, I need to tell you something," she began, her eyes brimming with tears. Chuka, sensing the gravity of her words, sat up and looked at her with concern. "What is it, Ada? You are scaring me." Adaora took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't hold it any longer. The lies had become too heavy. She told him everything about her desperate days in the university, the deal she had made with Ikenna, and how she had walked away without fulfilling her promise. She recounted Ikenna's return and the threats, how he had followed her, and finally the terrible accident during their confrontation. As she spoke, Chuka's face shifted from confusion to anger, then finally to devastation. He stood up, pacing the room, his fists clenched as he tried to process what he was hearing. The silence between them grew unbearable. "You made a deal with him? You led this man into our lives, put our family in danger, and didn't tell me?" Chuka's voice was filled with hurt and betrayal. Adaora could only sob, her head in her hands. "I'm sorry, Chuka. I was desperate. I thought I could handle it on my own. I never wanted this to happen." Chuka shook his head, his anger turning into something colder, something more painful. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me." His voice cracked with emotion as he looked at her. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Ada. The words hit Adaora like a punch to her chest. She watched helplessly as Chuka grabbed his things. His face hardened with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "I need time to think," he said. His voice strained. I am taking the kids to my sister for a while. I can't be here right now." Adaora tried to speak to him, to stop him, but the words wouldn't come. She could only watch as Chuka packed a small suitcase, went to the children's room and gently woke them. Kamsi and Ola looked confused as Chuka explained they were going on a little trip. Adaora stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as her family walked out of the house, leaving her behind. With her family gone, Adaora was left alone with the crushing weight of her actions. She barely slept or ate. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a prison of her own making. Days passed and the guilt became unbearable. She knew she couldn't just hide from the consequence of what had happened. One afternoon, Adaora drove to the hospital where Ikenna lay in a coma. As she made her way to his room, there, lying in the bed with tubes and machine keeping him alive, was the man whose life she had irrevocably changed. His face was pale and his chest rose and fell with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Adaora stood at the foot of the bed, overwhelmed with guilt. She had never meant for things to go this far. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry." Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to see Obinna, Ikenna's younger brother, standing in the doorway. His eyes filled with anger and sadness. He was tall and imposing, much more like Ikenna, but there was a heaviness in his gaze, and that spoke of his grief. "You are sorry?" Obinna's voice was low but filled with bitterness. "My brother lies here fighting for his life, and all you could say is that you are sorry?" Adora's voice wavered. "I never wanted this. It was an accident. Ikenna, he wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to reason with him." Obinna stepped closer. His eyes locked on hers. "Ikenna loved you. He gave up everything for you, and you threw him away like he meant nothing. Now look at what you have done." Adaora lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. She had no defense, no justification for her actions. She had been selfish, blinded by her own desperation. Obinna's anger seemed to simmer as he looked down at his brother. After a long silence, he sighed, the fight draining from him. "I could ruin you, Adaora. I could expose everything and you lose whatever you have left. But what would that achieve? My brother might never wake up. And even if he does, he won't be the same." Adaora looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Please, Obinna, I will do anything. Just don't hurt my family." Obinna stared at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "You've already destroyed your family, Adaora. There's nothing left for me to do." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Adaora standing in the silence, her guilt weighing heavier than ever. Weeks passed and Adora's life continued to unravel. Chuka hadn't returned, and though he brought the children to visit occasionally, the distance between them was palpable. He had lost trust in her, and no matter how much she tried to apologize or make amends, the damage was done. At work, rumors began to spread. Whispers of Ikenna's condition and Adora's involvement reached her colleagues, and her once thriving business began to suffer. Clients pulled their contracts, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Adaora, once the toast of Lagos business world, was now a pariah. One evening, Adaora found herself standing on the beach watching the waves crash against the shore. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the horizon. Significant against the vastness of the ocean, everything she had built was gone. Her family, her reputation, her business, all because of a choice she made years ago out of desperation. But as she stood there, she realized something. Though she had lost almost everything, she was still alive. And as long as she was alive, there was a chance for redemption, for rebuilding. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but Adaora knew she had to try. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Adaora whispered to herself, "I will find a way to make this right." Adora's first step was to seek forgiveness from the people she had wronged, starting with her husband. Though he had moved out and was still reeling from the betrayal, Adaora knew that she couldn't let the relationship end without trying to mend it. One evening, after several failed attempts to reach him, she finally asked him to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet park they used to visit during the early years of their relationship. When Chuka arrived, he looked distant, his face hardened by the pain she had caused. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," Chuka said, his voice flat. Adaora, her eyes filled with tears, nodded. "I know. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I can't live with myself if I don't try to make things right, if I don't ask for your forgiveness." Chuka was silent for a long time. Watching the trees sway in the wind, Adaora continued. "I kept everything from you because I was afraid of losing you, and in the end, I lost you anyway. I just want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person, even if you never come back to me." Chuka's expression softened, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. "It's not going to be that easy, Adaora. You've broken something in me, but I appreciate that you're taking responsibility. Maybe in time we can figure this out, but for now, I need space." It wasn't the complete reconciliation Adaora had hoped for, but it was a start. Chuka's willingness to consider healing their relationship gave her a glimmer of hope. Adaora also knew she couldn't move forward without making amends with Ikenna's family, especially his brother Obinna. Although Obinna had decided not to publicly ruin her, Adaora felt compelled to help in any way she could as part of her restitution. One afternoon, Adaora visited Ikenna's family, bringing with her an offer to cover Ikenna's medical bill and to support their family through his recovery. Regardless of whether he woke from his coma, she didn't want to offer money to absolve herself of guilt, but genuinely want to take responsibility for her part in the tragedy. At first, Obinna was cold and skeptical. "You think paying for his care makes up for everything you've done?" Adaora shook her head. "No, I know it doesn't, but I can't undo what's been done. All I can do is try to make things better moving forward." Over time, Obinna's anger lessened as he saw Adaora's consistent effort to help. She regularly visited Ikenna's bedside, not out of obligation, but because she felt it was her duty to be there. Her presence became a strange source of peace for Obinna, and though the tension between them never completely disappeared, they found a way to coexist without bitterness. The fallout from the scandal surrounding Ikenna's condition had cost Adaora nearly everything professionally. Clients pulled out of contracts, business partners distanced themselves, and her reputation was tarnished. But instead of giving up, Adaora decided to start over, this time focusing on something more meaningful. She sold her shares in her company, taking what little remained of her assets and using them to start a new non-profit organization. The organization, Second Chances, provided support for women who, like Adaora, once found themselves in desperate situations, struggling financially or emotionally. She knew firsthand what desperation could drive someone to do, and she wanted to create a safe space for others to find help before they made decisions they might regret. The process of starting from scratch was humbling. Adaora no longer had the luxury of her former wealth and connection. She faced plenty of skepticism from those who knew her past, but she was determined. Slowly, her organization gained traction, and she began partnering with other local businesses, offering women training programs. The success of Second Chance didn't come overnight, but in time, people began to see that Adaora was serious about making a positive difference. The media, once again, to cover her downfall, started highlighting her work, acknowledging her efforts to redeem herself and help others. Throughout her journey, Adaora's biggest motivation remained her children, Kamsi and Ola. Though young, they had sensed the tension in the household and the distance between their parents. Kamsi, her eldest, had been the most affected by the changes in their family. One evening, as they sat on the porch, she turned to Adaora and asked, "Mommy, are we going to be like we used to be?" Adaora smiled sadly, pulling Kamsi into a hug. "Things might not be exactly the same, but we are going to be okay, I promise you that." It was a long road, but gradually, Adaora rebuilt her relationship with her children, showing them through her actions that she was committed to being a better mother and role model. Months passed, and while the distance between Adaora and Chuka remained, there were signs that healing was possible. They spoke more regularly. And Chuka even attended a few of the events Adaora held for her non-profit. Impressed by the change he saw in her, one evening after a long day at one of her charity events, Adaora found Chuka waiting for her outside her office. He looked different, more at peace, more open. "I have been watching you," he said softly. "The way you've changed, the way you've owned up to your mistake. It's not easy to forgive what happened, but I see that you are trying, and that means a lot." Adaora felt her heart swell with hope, but she remained cautious. "Chuka, I don't expect you to forget everything. I just want a chance to show you that I can be the woman you fell in love with." Chuka smiled faintly, stepping closer. "I think I am starting to see that woman again." It wasn't an immediate reconciliation, but that night, as they talked for hours, both Adaora and Chuka realized that while things would never be the same as before, there was room to rebuild. They decided to take things slow, to allow time for healing, and to focus on what truly mattered: their family and their future together. Adaora's journey was one of painful growth and redemption. She had made grave mistakes, but through taking responsibility for her actions, seeking forgiveness, and dedicating herself to helping others, she found a way to rebuild her life. It wasn't perfect, and she knew that some scars would never fully heal, but in her heart, she knew she had found a second chance at life, love, and happiness. What did you learn from this, my story? Please put it in the comment section below. Bye.